It had to happen eventually, and it finally did. About 18 years ago. That's right, the Blue Bomber finally made the jump from NES to the Super Nintendo with Mega Man 7. With the upgrade in hardware comes a higher expectation for what the game should offer, and I'm not just talking about graphics. While managing to hit all the established notes, 7 managed to pack in a lot of extras, making it one of the meatier titles in the classic series. Of course, change isn't always good, and bloat can be a thing. So did Capcom bungle their jump or stick the landing? I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is a look back at Mega Man 7. Last game, Mega Man finally arrested Dr. Wily, so this time things start out with 4 Robot Masters he built previously, busting him out of the pen. Don't worry, he builds the other 4 while you're taking down the first set, so we still get 8. There's also a new robot running around named Bass, along with his partner, a robo-wolf named Treble, who Rock and Light immediately assume is an ally. There's a bit to take in here. First off, it's kind of incredible that they just take Bass being a friend as granted. Not saying that they should discriminate based off his sinister looks, but given that the series' main antagonist is a roboticist who, the very day Bass shows up, is using previously hidden robots to make his escape from prison and start his world domination plans anew, I feel like they should have been a little more cautious. I know we typically say fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, but given the timing, when Bass does betray them and bust up Light's lab while stealing plans for some upgrades for Mega Man and Rush, I feel like a decent bit of it is on you. Then again, given that Mega Man seems to still get surprised by Wily's Mr. X disguise, he does have a track record of not being able to sniff out a very obvious rat. Then again, I'm not sure that's really even an excuse, just a pattern. Anyway, to get back on track, the stuff he steals seems to give Bass and Treble their own version of the upgraded super adapter Mega Man can get in the game, giving the 2 pairs a nice bit of symmetry. Does kinda raise the question of how he stole something that wasn't even in the lab though. Maybe his is superior in some way. After all, Mega Man never gets the super adapter again after this, while it continues to be a staple for Bass, so maybe that's the key difference. Back to Wily though, it is kind of impressive that he not only came up with the source of Bass's power, Bassnium, in his free time, and came up with the plan to exploit Mega Man's major weakness of trusting people way too easily, he also had contingency plans for his possible capture. It raises another question though, of when he created these new bots. The obvious answer would be during 6, which means that Bass was around since then as well. Maybe the reason why he stole the bosses for that game was because he was working on plans in the background for this one, maybe even fully expecting to finally be captured. Or maybe he'd been working on a backlog of Robot Masters for years, possibly even as far back as 2, slowly building up his reserves while resisting the urge to use them to dogpile on Mega Man with his current roster. Kinda like this scenario more, since it shows Wily having a lot more foresight and cunning, and we don't just have to accept the very big coincidence where the one time Wily prepared for his possible capture was the one time he just happened to get captured. But as always, this is a kid's game, we're probably not supposed to think too hard about this. Though ignoring that advice again, this game also has the standout moment after the final boss fight where Mega Man decides to kill Wily, giving a cry of, "Die, Wily!" This is a major character-defining moment, maybe even the most character-defining. Robots having restrictions on harming humans, and Mega Man overcoming this programming and making the decision on his own on what needs to be done. Not only does it seem like he's moving past his own naive nature, it also implies that he's evolved to the point of having free will, possibly being the harbinger of the true sentient Light achieves with X, and Reploids as a whole. I don't think there's a more important scene in the classic series. Or I wouldn't if this wasn't a change put in for the English localization. I think we could talk at length on whether Mega Man deciding to kill Wily was a good direction for the character, but hopefully we can all agree that adding this one line to a single version of the game was a huge misstep. This one act completely recontextualizes Mega Man for Western audiences, while Japan and quite possibly other regions as well likely have no idea what we're talking about when we say he's more than a robot, he's Mega Man. It really muddies up the canon, and I imagine a lot of us have no idea that this never officially happened. It explains why this bit is never brought up again. Faithful translation and localization can be pretty important. Oh, and having base be powered by basenium isn't dumb. If I had a robot that ran on nuclear power and named him Nuke, no one would bat an eye. While he discovered the element, he can call it whatever he wants. Mega Man still jumps and shoots, and he retains the slide and charge shot. That last one has been a bit nerfed this time around, or it might be more accurate to say that a lot of enemies got buffed. The charge shot still has a pretty big hitbox, so no worries there, but there are a good number of regular enemies that will take more than a single powered up hit to go down. While the tiniest of enemies, such as Mets and the weird little orange tin cans that float by, don't take too much to kill, many like the Sniper Joes and Shielders will take a full shot, then a few plinks, and some of the heftier foes, like the polar bears and stegosauruses, will take a lot of damage to get them out of your way. I think the most surprising one to me are the Ravens and Shademan stage, which looks like they should be an easy out, but fall into that second category instead. Still, none of them are too aggressive, so even if you do need to dish out a bit more damage, as long as you face them carefully, you shouldn't get overwhelmed. As for Rush, you start off with Coil, letting you reach greater heights by bouncing you upwards, but you need to find his other two functions rather than just getting them by defeating a certain boss. Jet works like normal. You stand on Rush, he flies ahead, with you being able to move him up and down, and energy draining every second he's out. The other form is new though, the Rush Search. Summon him to have him dig up something random, from a power-up to just trash. In 3 specific spots though, he'll dig up a permanent upgrade, like the stage exit and the energy balancer, which automatically sends an energy refill to the weapon with the lowest ammo count if you don't have anything equipped. Oh, and if something hits Rush while he's searching, he'll teleport off, so be mindful of your situation. Besides that, there are a lot of things for you to find in this game. As always, you can get E-tanks to refill your life, plus W-tanks to refill your ammo, and an S-tank to refill everything. You can carry up to 4 of the first 2 and only 1 of the last. Beat whistles will summon Beat to pull you out of a pit if you fall, and you can also hold up to 4 of those as well. Then there's the big ticket items. Find the letters for Rush in the first 4 levels, and you get the Super Adapter, an amalgamation of the Jet and Power adapters from 6, as well as the Mega Arm from Roman numeral 5. No slide for you in this form, but no limits on how much you use it either. You can fly for a short distance at a diagonal climb, and a charge shot shoots your fist off instead. And if you use the Rush Search in a 3rd special spot, you get a powered up rocket punch that goes a bit further and also homes. While it's called Super, I'd say it's actually balanced pretty nicely against Mega Man's normal form. The adapter trades horizontal movement for vertical, and while the punch is stronger and you don't really have to aim once you get the upgrade, it can only hit 1 enemy, as opposed to your shot continuing on if it wipes out a foe. Both are worth using, and figuring out which form works better for which situation is half the fun. You can also get the Proto Shield, which blocks some projectiles when you stand still. Find Proto Man twice, then a 3rd time in Shade Man's stage to beat him in a fight and earn this. I'm sure some people find it neat, but I'd never use it, and if I collect it, it's just for bragging rights. Besides all this, Auto has a shop you can visit by pressing select on the stage select screen. Collect bolts in the levels and fallen enemies to spend here. He'll sell you basic power-ups, like lives and E-tanks, but once you find his bolt, he'll not only cut his prices, but also offer new stuff, like the S-tank. You can also buy some of the special upgrades I mentioned earlier, like the upgraded rocket punch, though some of the more involved ones, like the power adapter and shield, you still have to earn. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot to collect here. The game really gives you a good bit to do and keep your eye out for, and since I'm the type to really enjoy stuff like optional tasks, I really like all the little extras in this one. It does lead to one small gripe though, and that's how crowded the menu is. This thing has 2 tabs, one for your powers and one for items. While it doesn't take too terribly long to get down to the next tab, it can be kind of annoying when you're just looking to check your number of E-tanks or lives real quick. The second one really gets me since there's a lot of times in these games when I just want to know whether I should press on or SD to get back the 2 extra lives. While I'm sure this sounds petty and it's nowhere near enough to ruin your time with the game, I really wish they would have managed to put everything on screen at once. Or at least made it so that there was a life counter under your health bar. Sometimes it's the small things. We got a decent lineup of weapons in this one. Danger Wrap shoots out a bomb in a bubble that floats upwards and can trap some enemies. It can also just drop the bombs on the ground instead, like a mine, which I only learned about recently. So that's neat. Thunderbolt shoots out a ball of electricity that splits into 2 shots vertically when it collides with something, so it can deal a nice bit of damage on taller enemies. Junk Shield gives you some nice defense, 3 pieces of trash circling around you. Each disappears as it hits something, and they can also be shot off. Freeze Cracker gets fired off, you can angle it up or down while it's in motion, and when it hits something, it breaks into several small shots that fly in all directions, so it's kind of like shotgun ice. Thinking about it, Thunderbolt is also kind of like Electric Spark, and both this and X1 are on the Super Nintendo. Moving on, Slash Claw hits right in front of Mega Man, so you need to get in close, but the damage is normally worth it. Noise Crush fires out a sound wave that, if you reabsorb, essentially turns it into a charged version of itself. Scorch Wheel spins several fireballs around Mega Man before rolling forward. And Wild Coil sucks. It sucks so darn much. Use it to throw out a spring on either side of Mega Man, and charging them up will make them stronger and bounce higher. It is so awkward to use that I typically don't unless it's against a boss that's weak to it, at a height I know I can definitely hit without a lot of finagling. Yes, I know there's some tech to it that I just haven't learned, but it feels so unintuitive, and some of the bosses you're expected to use it against are really such a pain in the butt already that trying to get in some practice in the middle of the fight is just unappealing. While there are worse weapons in the series, the situation this thing puts you in just make it my most hated out of any weapon from any game. I'll take literally anything else. Yes, even Power Stone. And a few of the weapons have secondary functions that are stage specific, such as changing the weather into more than just Rain and Cloud Man stage, or burning down trees in Slash Man's. So yeah, none of them do anything too crazy, but none of them feel too basic either, so it feels good using all of them. Other than Coil, of course. I really like the stage design in this one. Just visually, we have a lot of fun locations here, from a toy factory to a haunted house to what appears to be essentially Robo Jurassic Park. Even the retreads, like an ice stage and sky level that borrow pretty heavily from Airman at points, manage to look pleasant enough that I don't mind the repetition. Mechanically, they're pretty solid too. Burst Man's is a new take on the standard water level, some parts doing the normal water physics thing, some causing even robots to become buoyant and making you float to the top. Different weather effects and invisible platforms aren't anything too crazy, and like I said, Cloudman's stage mirrors Airman's in a few sections, but being able to use different weapons to choose the weather is pretty neat. Junkman's stage just does a lot, from an elevator section to lava you can freeze for an alternate path, to moving platforms, to different machinery you can turn on, so it never gets boring. Freeze Man's is probably the simplest, the big standouts being slippery floors and platforms that break about a second after you step on them. Shade Man has 2 distinct paths, depending on how you take down the sub-boss, so it's worth playing twice. Slash Man has a log and waterfall platforming section, as well as dinosaurs you have to ride over spike pits. Spring Man makes the bold choice of being pink and has springs everywhere, making it very bouncy and you have to navigate it carefully. It's probably my favorite one here and the clear inspiration for Bounce Man's in 11. Out of the regular stages, I think Turbo Man is the only one I don't like. Like Junk Man's, there's a lot packed into this, but all the stuff I find irritating. The tires that go by overhead give very little wiggle room to jump over the spikes in Sub-Boss Pit. The flame tower blocks can be a little tedious. They brought back the security lasers from 2, but now with fire, and the truck you have to take down can be hard to hit, with all the crap it throws your way. Could really do without this one. On the whole though, they're pretty fun to tackle, and even if they don't sound too interesting with some of the gimmicks, each one has a cast of baddies that fit the level's theme and make them stand out. From dinos, to polar bears, to zombies, to cockroaches, which more than make up for some of the more straightforward sections. When it comes to the Wily stages, things get a little more lackluster. Each appears to be just a generic fortress you could possibly confuse with another game. When it comes to how they play though, the first one comes out swinging. Lights go out when you're on a surface, but jump in the air and the area is revealed. This is combined beautifully with platforms you need to ride around past that will, at points where the track changes appearance, spin and drop you, so you need to memorize the screen when it's visible and time your jumps carefully. Also a great place to make use of the super adapter. After that, things become a bit less exciting, mostly recycling old stage gimmicks like the flame tower blocks and the water physics from Burst Man, and can at times even be unfair, like when you start floating upwards at the end of said section, you not being able to see where you're going, and the scrolling screen corralling you into a spike trap you have no way of predicting other than experience. While I don't really hate this set of levels, they do feel like a bit of a letdown compared to what was on offer earlier. Overall though, a very strong showing. I really like this set of bosses. A lot of them seem almost inspired by classic movies or cartoons that were popular at the time. Shademan is vampire inspired. Junkman has elements of Frankenstein's monster. Turboman is a transformer, and Slashman looks like a feral Wolverine. The rest of them are also pretty neat looking, from Cloudman's fluffy cloud, how Springman bounces and wobbles, and Freezeman's ice bits look great, plus he makes a fun pose at the beginning of his fight. They're just a really fun roster of characters, and if just one game could get a set of action figures based on its bosses, this would be it. Well, assuming we discounted popularity. No one's beating 2 and 3 in that category. The only one that I'm a little iffy on is Burstman. Don't get me wrong, I really like him and think he looks great, I just don't know if his design really gets across what he's about. The two big clues that he's a chemist are the piping he has over his shoulders, which could be there for anything really, even just flare, and the strange, kind of bubbly liquid in his boob lights, which you can't really see the finer details of in his sprite. Luckily, his stage gives you a few hints before you get to him, as does his boss entrance. But just looking at the guy, I'm more likely to think he's a chess-themed boss by how his head is shaped. Am I alone in this? For the bosses themselves, you have two main scenarios. The first involves rolling the bosses using their weaknesses, not quite spark mandrilling them, but still being pathetic enough that you'll likely take little to no damage. The second, you're in for a tricky fight where you could probably outdamage them with their weakness, so you have to be a little careful, but you'll probably be fine. And if you go in Buster only, well, then you're in for a fight regardless. A lot of these guys, if you use the optimal weapon, will get stunned with a small damage animation which will reset their attack pattern. If you choose to forego this though, they're able to get further into their routine and start throwing out some new moves, making it a completely different fight. While a few still aren't super hard, at the same time, I wouldn't call any of them pushovers when you do it this way, so it's a great difficulty option for a game that doesn't have easy and hard modes. For a few individual bosses to watch out for, Freeze and Slash move around a lot and can be hard to avoid. The Fire's Turboman's Flame Wheel drops fall randomly, plus he varies up the timing of his card dash attack. Think there's an audio component with that one though, and I tend to stream on low volume, so it could be a me thing. And Burstman has an insta-kill. If he traps you in a bubble and you don't bust out before you hit the spike ceiling, you die. Special weapons don't seem to cut it for this situation, spamming Buster does, so I normally just start with this guy and Buster only him. A good number of them also have moves which can freeze you in place, making you just have to wait for them to decide how they want to hit you, nothing you can do. I find this frustrating and I really hate those moves in particular. For special bosses, since we have more than just the Wily stages this time, Mad Grinder looks cool and has some nice attacks, but being the intro boss, dies way too easily, which is disappointing. At least one of the arcade games made use of him. Halfway through the game, you fight this weird, clown-looking boss that jumps around while its head spins. If you hit it in the head, it pops off and bounces and you can keep shooting it until the main body retrieves it. It's pretty easy once you get the attack window down, but I imagine it could be a nightmare for newer players. Base is all over the place. In the first fight, you stand on opposite sides of each other and just jump and shoot, and win or lose, you don't die, he just either compliments or insults you. Pretty brain dead, but whatever, it's an introduction. He comes back in the final stages as a mid-boss and is a bit more dynamic here. The second encounter has you in a small room as he moves about and fires awesome shots, and the third time, he uses his super adapter to fly around and shoot his fist off. I think the second fight is harder, since it's a more enclosed space with less dodging room, whereas the third has fans, letting you jump higher and the area being a lot taller so you can easily just stay away from him until you're ready to strike, but I typically use my super for this one, so my opinion could be a bit skewed. If you find Proto Man, he jumps and shoots and defends a lot. You need to pick your times to attack, and he doesn't have a health bar, so it can kinda be hard to pace yourself on this, but stick with it and maybe bring an E-Tank or two. Now for Wily stages proper. Due to his odd obsession with Gutsman, Wily gives us this alteration of the boss here, with tank treads and a claw. I prefer the original design, but I guess it's nice to see him again. This is kind of an odd fight. He throws boulders at you, which aren't too hard to avoid, but you can only hit him in the face. He's weak to the close range slash claw, and the ceiling lowers, so it can be a bit stressful. Plus, he has one attack where he rushes you to grab and pitch you into the ceiling, which I'm not 100% sure on how to dodge. Then you get a turtle which breathes fire and also goes into its shell to ram the wall, multiple times. The main part of its body can also fly off, leaving behind a small hanger that will pop out tiny turtles. These things have 3 attack patterns, and since you can only hurt the boss when its head's out, this can be annoying and feel like a waste of time, but these smaller enemies can also drop power-ups, so it's also an opportunity. Then there's this weird floating Hanya mask, which flies after you in a scrolling section, peppering you with missiles, bombs, and a laser. It's vulnerable in the general eyes and nose area, you know, the places where you'd rather not get punched, so you need to wait until it dips down to hit it. It's weak to Slash Claw, but given how tricky it can be to use while in motion, I tend to just stick to the Buster even if it takes a bit longer. All of these fort bosses are a decent challenge. I've gotten through all of them without using an E-Tank, but if I find that I need to pop one, I don't feel too embarrassed about it or stubbornly insist on trying for a better round next time. Then we get to the main attraction, the final boss. Wily Machine walks around, shooting out 2 miniature versions of itself. You hit the window and slide under it to get behind it, since staying in front too long will make it start moving more aggressively. When it reaches the edge of the screen, it does a big jump, then lands, destroying the mini-mechs while popping out 2 more, starting the process over. While it might be a little tricky early on, as you get the ins and outs down, it's not too bad. What comes next, though, is, perhaps, the most infamous boss in the whole franchise, Mega Man 7's Wily Capsule. And you know what? I think this one fits better in another category, so we'll talk about this in a few minutes. Music is very nice in this one. It has a bit of a different vibe this time, which might have a good bit to do with the new console, but still manages to fit nicely in the Mega Man stable of music. On the NES, they tended to get you jazzed up by having a more rock feel to them, but here, they tend to get you hyped by being high energy and, dare I say, feel good. Though I'd say some of the Wily stages bring it back around to being more like the old style. Those would be the standouts for me, along with Springman's, which I feel is very playful, and there's something very pleasing, almost mysterious yet wild about Slashman's. There's 2 other stages we can't forget about though. Shademan's theme has some creepy elements and is really well done, but if you're in the mood for something different, holding down the B button before entering will give you the Ghouls and Goblins track instead. I'd say it's a shame you can only listen to one at a time, but given the 2 different paths with separate upgrades, you can have both. Just make sure you do the special theme on your first trip. Then there's the really great medley of Guts, Heat, and Snake Man stages that play during the Robot Museum. While it doesn't take too long to loop, just under a minute, it's still a really great track, and I wish we had longer to listen to it than just a short, straight hallway. Overall, the soundtrack is great, and if you've never heard it on its own, it's definitely worth a listen. I'd say the visuals, though, are this game's strongest aspect. The sprite work is so cute and charming, from the backgrounds to the foregrounds to the actual characters, giving the game a really pleasing aesthetic. When it comes to the animations, there are so many small little movements that they could have cut a lot more corners with, but the different characters and enemies look so much more lively as a result. I honestly can't believe they took the time for all these little details. All the things I said about the designs and stages looking good come down to this, giving the game a sense of whimsy and making it feel almost like you're playing through a pixely cartoon, which also goes really well with the boss designs. This is easily one of the best looking games on the Super Nintendo, really only the Donkey Kong Country title springing to mind as a possible contender. It makes it such a shame that we didn't get another classic title on the console. Oh, and just a few miscellaneous things. There's a glitch where, if you shoot off a Noise Crush right as you enter Turbo Man's room, you can get an insta-kill on him. Said I wouldn't mention these anymore unless it was something major, and I think this one is fun enough to count. And if you type in the ultimate code for all of everything, directly into the final stage, and hold down the shoulder buttons before hitting start, making the code even codier, you get a 2-player mode. You choose between Mega Man and Bass and fight for best out of 3. You jump, you shoot, you charge, you have some special inputs you can use for an extra attack. Managed to get some close range slash claw like thing to pop up by trying to do the Hadoken, but it was never consistent, so I might have just pulled it off by accident by mashing. Sometimes the opponent will also get stunned, but I'm not 100% on what causes it. Either way, it's a neat little diversion, but not terribly complex, especially since the arena is so tiny. I'd say give it a try if you can find a second player, but don't plan on it taking up your entire afternoon. So how's it on difficulty? When it comes to the stages, I'd say 7 is a little harder than normal. While I'd say Turbo Man's is a bit of an outlier, the rest are on the level that most people familiar with the series should be able to handle, maybe just a tad harder with its tankier enemies and the stages feeling a little longer than usual as well. When you get to the Wily stages, they step things up a bit, but it mostly stays at a reasonable level, and while there are a few cheap hits and deaths, it's not the worst I've ever seen, and they're not frequent enough to give a game over, so it's not horrible. When it comes to the bosses, it does the thing I talked about before, where you can pretty much choose easy or hard mode, depending on whether you use their weakness, which is pretty creative. Still haven't managed to take Slashman down Buster only. The Fortress bosses don't quite cross over into frustrating, so they're challenging but fair as well. And then there's the Wily Capsule, which I delayed talking about. The Wily Capsule, which single-handedly puts this game beyond any of the other standard difficulty classic games, which is why I wanted to discuss it here rather than with bosses. So, it pops in and out of sight, sending out 4 energy balls that fly in your direction. Electric balls do damage, ice freezes you, getting you hit by the follow-up attack from the capsule, and fire traps you for a few seconds, taking several ticks of damage over time. These attacks are extremely hard to avoid, and the capsule will oftentimes be out of range of conventional attacks, and this is where the problems start. There are 3 ways to damage the capsule. The first is to wait and hope it appears in a spot where you can jump up and hit it, which is not reliable. The second is to use a less optimal weapon that's more likely to hit, like the Freeze Cracker, which will do minimal damage but can be arched upwards, or the upgraded Power Adapter, which will be harder to dodge with. The third is to use the actual weakness, the Wild Coil, which is unintuitive and awkward to use. If the capsule flies low, you can ding it pretty easily with the weapon, but if it's top screen, you need to charge the thing first, release it while holding up, and angle it perfectly to get a hit. And I only learned about the press up thing a few days ago. The attacks are so hard to dodge that I saw one strategy that revolved around getting hit with the electric ball to take the least amount of damage, rather than avoiding them altogether. This game only lets you hold 4 E-tanks and 1 S, so this is the least amount of healing you're able to do since 2. The fight is unreasonably hard, and I know what some people are going to say, it's not that bad, you just need to get good, and to them I say, you're objectively wrong. Keiji Inafune, one of the game's main creators, is quoted as saying, "Let's make the very last fight insanely hard," and he'd be the expert. This one is meant to be a pain. There's a few things they could have done to make this one more manageable, but making the weakness something easier to use, like the Freeze Cracker, would have gone a long way. The big thing that I really hate about this fight though, is that it takes place in the same level as the boss rush, so if you game over, you need to fight not only the preceding Wily machine yet again, but the 8 robot masters as well. While fighting all of them isn't too big of a deal, doing so over and over again is absolutely no fun. While changing the weakness and maybe letting me pocket more E-tanks would be nice, if I could change only one thing about Capsule, it would be to give this thing its own standalone stage. Keep the first form if you must, but dear lord, do not make me deal with anything else. Let me concentrate on this and this alone. This is such a massive and unreasonable spike in difficulty, with a bunch of other little bothersome elements further exacerbating the situation, that it actively drags down the rest of the game. I love Mega Man 7 and consider it one of the best in the series, but when I had to fight this thing at the end of the experience, it hanging over my head like the sword of Damocles, how the heck am I supposed to enjoy what I'm doing in the moment? The whole thing reads like a joke the developers thought was funny without them really thinking about what the recipient of the prank would feel when they heard the punchline. Mega Man 7 is hard, really hard, but the bulk of the difficulty all takes place in the last 5 minutes. Or few hours, if it takes you several tries to clear. Damn the Wily Capsule. Oh my, oh me. What a nice, glowing review, punctuated by a big, fat, stinkin' sour note, right there at the end. Is there a more perfect and appropriate way for a video on Mega Man 7 to go? While it does have some pretty major faults that do hold it back from attaining perfection, I still do really like this game and think it's worth a play. On a positive note, since most people who give it a go now will be using the Legacy Collection, they'll have access to checkpoint saves, which they can load to get right back to just before the final boss, invalidating a few of my complaints. that little modern convenience does a lot on its own just to make the game a good deal better. With that said, I think that wraps up our look back on the one and, sadly, only entry in the classic series for the Super Nintendo. So what do you think? Is this game impeccably designed? Do you find it conventionally attractive? Am I whining way too much about the capsule? All opinions welcome, just remember, if you disagree with me on that last point, you're saying the game's creators are wrong too. As always, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you enjoy Mega Man content. For everlasting peace.